Hello everyone, welcome back to the Life Science Coach. Myself Dr. Prashant, and today's lecture we are going to learn about animal behavior. Have you ever wondered why birds migrate thousands of kilometers? How ants work together in perfect coordination? Why lions hunt in groups? How bees communicate with each other regarding the location of the food? So, in this lecture, we are going to cover topics such as introduction and history of the animal behavior, development of behavior, hormones and genetics, neural control, and stereotyped behavior. So, first of all, what is animal behavior? Animal behavior is the study of how animals interact with the environment, other organisms, and internal and external stimuli. So, there are certain behaviors that can be innate in the sense present at birth, which is also called as naturally programmed. And second one is learned behavior, acquired through experience and practice. Then third one is simple, involves a single response or an action. Fourth is complex, involves a sequence of coordinated actions. Fifth one is social, performed in interaction with other animals. And sixth one is individual, performed alone by the animal. So these are the different type of behavior which you can see in different type of animals. For example, from nature you can see few examples of bees communicating and working together, birds building nests and taking care of their young ones, lions hunting in groups, which is also known as cooperative behavior, and fish responding to water temperature and oxygen levels. So how are these behavior developed in an organism or an animal? So why study animal behavior? What's the purpose of learning the animal behavior in the first place? So what is the importance here is survival and adaptation. Survival and adaptation helps animals to adapt to the environment, find food, avoid predators, and ensure survival. Second one is wildlife conservation. So one of the important aspects of studying this animal behavior is to understand behavior that helps protect endangered species, conserve habitats, and maintain the biodiversity. Third, animal welfare improves living conditions by understanding needs, reducing stress, and promoting well-being of that specific animal. Fourth one is evolutionary studies. Behavior provides clues about evolution, natural selection, and the relationship between the species. Fifth one is livestock management. Helps improve productivity, breeding, health, and handling of domesticated animals. Sixth one is veterinary applications. Assists in diagnosis and treatment of behavioral disorders and improves animal care. Historical development of animal behavior. To understand modern animal behavior, it is very important to look at how this field developed over time. So our journey begins with Aristotle, often called as the first naturalist. More than 2000 years ago, he carefully observed animals and documented their habits, reproduction, communication, and also migration. So his work laid the foundation for the scientific study of animal behavior. Next came the pre-Darwin era. During this period, animal behavior was often explained through anthropomorphism, which means attributing human thoughts and emotion to animals. Although observations were made, there was little specific explanation for why animals behaved the way they did. So, a major breakthrough occurred in 1859 with Charles Darwin and his book on the origin of species. Darwin proposed that behavior, like physical traits, evolves through natural selection. He suggests that behaviors that improve survival and reproduction are more likely to pass on to the future generation. Moving into the early 20th century, scientists began studying learning and intelligence through comparative psychology. Researchers such as Ivan Pavlov, Edward Thorndike, and B.F. Skinner conducted experiments that revealed how animals learn through conditioning and experience. At the same time, another field called ethology emerged. So, ethologists studied animals in their natural environments rather than in laboratories. The founders of ethology, Konrad Lorenz, Niko Tinbergen, and Karl von Frisch, made groundbreaking discoveries about instinctive behavior, communication, and animal societies. These contributions earned them Nobel Prize in 1973. So today we are in the era of modern behavioral biology. Animal behavior is now studied using knowledge from multiple disciplines including genetics, neuroscience, ecology, evolutionary biology, and endocrinology. This integrated approach helps us understand not only what animals do but also how and why they do it. Aristotle, father of animal behavior. So let's study the animal behavior with one of the earliest and most influential scientists in history, that is none other than Aristotle, who lived from 384 to 322 BC. In ancient Greece, is often regarded as father of animal behavior because he was the first person to systematically observe and document the behavior of animals. Unlike many people of his time who relied on myths and assumptions, Aristotle carefully watched animals in their natural surroundings and recorded what he observed. His approach marked the beginning of scientific observation in biology. One of his major contributions was the study of animal reproduction. He described how different animals reproduce and develop, laying the groundwork for future biological studies. He also observed migration, noticing that certain birds and other animals moved from one region to another during specific seasons. Although he did not fully understand the reason behind migration, his observations were remarkably accurate for that period. Another area he explored was animal communication. He noted that how animals use sounds, movements, and other signals to interact with each other. He also documented animal habits and daily activities, including feeding behavior, social interactions, nesting patterns, and movement, which we usually study in the animal behavior today. Darwin's contribution to animal behavior. One of the most important milestones in the study of animal behavior came from Charles Darwin. In 1859, Darwin published his first famous book on the origin of species. This work revolutionized biology and changed the way scientists used to understand both physical traits and behavior. He also proposed that behavior evolves through a process called natural selection. According to this idea, animals processing behaviors that improve survival and reproduction are more likely to pass those behaviors to the future generations. For example, animals that are better at finding food, avoiding predator, or attracting mates have a greater chance of surviving and producing offspring. Over many generations, these advantageous behaviors became more common within a certain population. Second important concept is adaptation. Animals continuously adjust and evolve behaviors that help them cope with environmental changes, migration, camouflage, cooperative hunting, and parental care. All these are examples of behavioral adaptations that improve survival. Over long periods of time, these adaptive behaviors contribute to evolution. Evolution is the gradual change in populations across generations, leading to the development of new behavioral traits and sometimes even new species. Darwin's idea also highlighted an important connection between humans and other animals. He argued that animals and human behavior share common evolutionary origin. This means that many behavioral behaviors seen in humans, such as communication, social interaction, parental care, and emotional responses, can be traced back to behavior found in other animals. Today, Darwin's theory remains the foundation of modern behavioral biology. Scientists continue to use evolutionary biology principles to explain why animals behave the way they do and how these behaviors have been developed over time. Comparative psychology, the study of animal behavior through experiments to understand learning and intelligence. After Charles Darwin introduced the idea of behavior evolves through natural selection, scientists became increasingly interested in understanding how animals learn and solve problems. This led to development of comparative psychology, a branch of behavioral science that compares the behavior, learning abilities, and intelligence of different animal species. Comparative psychologists mainly studied animals under controlled laboratory conditions to discover the mechanism behind learning and decision making. So, three scientists made particularly important contributions to this field. The first one was Ivan Pavlov, a Russian physiologist famous for his work on classical conditioning. In his experiments, dogs learned to associate the sound of a bell with food. Eventually, the dogs salivated when they heard the bell alone, even when there was no food present. This demonstrated that animals can learn through associations between stimuli. Second scientist was Edward Thorndike, who developed the concept of trial and error learning. Through experiments using puzzle boxes, he observed that animals gradually learned successful behaviors by uh, repeatedly trying different actions. Incorrect responses decreased over time, while successful responses became stronger. The third major contributor was B.F. Skinner, who introduced operant conditioning. Skinner showed that behavior is influenced by its consequences. Actions followed by rewards are more likely to be repeated, while actions followed by punishments are less likely to occur in future. Together, these scientists demonstrated that behavior is not only inherited but also can be shaped by experiencing and learning. Ethology, study of behavior in natural conditions, also known as the scientific study of animal behavior as it occurs in natural environments. While comparative psychologists mainly studied animals in controlled laboratory settings, another group of scientists believed that animal behavior should be observed in their natural environment, where it actually occurs. This approach gave rise to a branch of science known as ethology. Ethology is the scientific study of animal behavior under natural conditions. Ethologists observe animals in their natural habitats to understand how behavior helps them survive, reproduce, communicate, and interact with their environment. Three scientists are recognized as the founders of ethology. First one is Konrad Lorenz. He is best known for his work on imprinting, a form of learning in which young animals form a strong attachment to their first moving object they can see after birth. His famous experiment with grey lag geese showed that newly hatched goslings would follow him as if he were their mother. The second founder is Niko Tinbergen. He developed important methods for studying behavior and introduced the famous four questions of ethology, which helps scientists understand the causes, development, function, and evolution of behavior. He also conducted significant research on birds and fishes. The third founder is Karl von Frisch. He made a remarkable discovery about honeybees communication. He found that bees perform a special movement known as the waggle dance to communicate direction and distance of the food sources to other members of the colony. Together, these scientists transformed the study of animal behavior by emphasizing careful observations in natural environments rather than relying on solely relying solely on laboratory experiments. So, modern behavioral biology, integration of sciences. Modern behavioral biology brings together knowledge from multiple scientific disciplines to understand why animals behave the way they do. Firstly, genetics, which studies genes and heredity to understand how genetic information influences their behavior. Then, second one is ecology. It examines how animals interact with their environment and how these interactions influence their behavior. Third one is endocrinology, which helps in investigating hormones and their effects on behavior, development, reproduction, and also stress response. Fourth is neuroscience, which helps explore the structure and function of the nervous system and brain to understand behavior. Final Fifth one is evolutionary biology, studies evolution, natural selection, to explain the origin and adaptive value of behaviors. Diversity of behavior. Let's look at some examples. First, birds are well known for migration. Many bird species travel thousands of kilometers between breeding and wintering grounds. This behavior helps them find food, favorable climates, and suitable nesting sites. Next, honeybees use a remarkable form of dance communication called as the waggle dance. Through scientific movements, bees communicate the direction and distance of the food sources to other members of the colony. Next, spiders display specialized web building behavior. Different species construct unique web designs that help them capture prey efficiently. This behavior is largely innate and highly adapted to their ecological needs. Then, lions demonstrate cooperative hunting. Members of a pride work together to stalk, surround, and capture prey. Cooperation increases hunting success and allows them to catch larger animals. Penguins provide excellent example of parental care, prevents invest significant time and energy in protecting eggs, incubating them and feeding their chicks to ensure offspring survival. Finally, ants exhibit advanced social organization. Ant colonies function like highly organized societies where individuals perform specialized roles such as workers, soldiers, and queen. This division of labor helps maintain the efficiency of the colony. This diversity shows how animals have evolved unique behavioral strategies to adapt to their specific environment and lifestyle. Unity of behavior. Despite the vast diversity seen across species, animal behavior are governed by a set of common underlying principles. This concept is known as the unity of behavior. The first principle is survival. Nearly every behavior helps an animal survive. Behaviors such as finding food, escaping predators, seeking shelter, and avoiding danger all increases the chance of staying alive. The second principle is reproduction. Animals engage in behaviors that can help them attract mates, reproduce successfully, and ensure the survival of their offsprings. Courtship displays, nesting, parental care, and territorial defense are all examples of the reproductive behavior. The third principle is genetic influence. Many behaviors are partly inherited through genes. Animals are born with certain behavioral tendencies, instincts, and predispositions that have evolved over generations. Fourth principle is environment influence. Behavior is also shaped by experience and environmental conditions. Learning, habitat, climate, availability of food, and interactions with the other organisms can modify how an animal behaves. The fifth principle is natural selection. Behaviors that improve survival and reproductive success are more likely to be passed on to the future generations. As we discussed earlier, over the time, these beneficial behaviors become common in certain population. These principles lead us to one of the most important concepts in behavioral biology. Behavior is not controlled solely by genes nor solely by the environment. Instead, behavior results from the interaction between both. So, this relationship can be summarized by the formula behavior equals genes plus environment. Genes provide the biological potential for behavior, while the environment shapes how potential is expressed. For example, a bird may have genetic ability to sing, but the exposure to adult birds is often necessary for it to develop a normal song pattern. Therefore, behavior is best understood as a product of both heredity and experience working together. Complex behavior. Not all animal behaviors are simple reflexes or individual actions. Many behaviors involve multiple coordinated activities, decision-making processes, and interaction with the environment or other animals. These are known as complex behaviors. Complex behavior consists of series of organized actions that work together to achieve an important biological goal. such as again survival, reproduction, communication, or social cooperation. The first example is migration. Migration is regular seasonal movement of animals from one location to another. Animals migrate to find food, suitable breeding grounds, or favorable climatic conditions. Examples include migratory birds, Arctic terns, and monarch butterflies that travel thousands of kilometers each year. Second example is social behavior. Social behavior involves interaction among members of the same species. Animals living in groups often cooperate in hunting, defense, reproduction, and caring for offspring. Ant colonies, bee societies, wolf packs, and primate groups are excellent examples of social behavior. The third example is communication. Animals constantly exchange information with each other through sounds, visual displays, body movements, chemical signals, and touch. Communication helps animals locate food, warn others of danger, attract mates, and maintain social relationships. Bird songs, bee dances, and pheromone signaling are common examples of this communication. The fourth example is parental care. Parental care includes behaviors that increase the survival chances of a offspring. Parents may build nests, incubate eggs, feed young, protect them from predators, and teach survival skills. Penguins, many bird species, and mammals demonstrate remarkable parental care behaviors. Although these four behaviors appear different, they share one common feature: they involve multiple coordinated actions that helps animals survive and reproduce more successfully. Development of behavior. One of the most important questions in behavioral biology is, how does a behavior develop? The first influence is genes. Genes provide the biological blueprint for behavior. They determine inherited traits and create the potential for certain behavioral patterns. Many instinctive behaviors, such as web spinning in spiders, migration in birds, suckling in newborn mammals, have a strong genetic basis. However, genes alone do not completely determine their behavior. The second influence is the environment. The environment includes everything an animal experiences throughout its life, such as food availability, climate, habitat, social interaction, learning opportunities, and encounters with their predators. These experiences can shape, modify, and sometimes even override genetically programmed behaviors. So, behavior develops through the continuous interaction with these two factors, genes and environment. For example, many birds are genetically programmed with the ability to sing. However, young birds often need to hear adult birds singing in order to develop a normal and complete song. Without environmental exposure, their song may remain incomplete. Similarly, humans inherit the biological ability to learn language, but the specific language we speak depends on the environment in which we grow up. Therefore, behavior is not simply inherited, nor it is entirely learned. It is the result of genes and environment working together throughout development. This relationship can be summarized by a simple equation: genes plus environment equals behavior. Innate versus learned behavior. Now that we understood how behavior develops through the interaction of genes and environment, let's examine two major categories of behavior: innate behavior and learned behavior. Although all behaviors involve both genetic and environment influences to some extent, some behaviors are primarily inherited while others are acquired through experience. Innate behavior are inborn behavior that are present at birth. These behaviors are genetically programmed and can be performed correctly the very first time without prior learning or practice because they are inherited. Innate behaviors are generally similar among members of the same species. A classic example is suckling in mammals. A newborn puppy, calf, kitten, or other mammal instinctively knows how to suck milk from their mothers immediately after birth. After Another example is web spinning in spiders. Now let's look at learned behavior. Learned behavior develops after birth through experience, observation, practice, and interaction with the environment. Unlike innate behavior, learned behavior can vary between individuals depending on their own experiences. One example is dog training. Dogs learn commands such as sit, fetch, roll over, and shake hands through repetitions, rewards, and training. Another example is bird songs. The comparison highlights an important difference. Innate behavior are inherited and require no training, whereas learned behavior are acquired through experience and environmental interaction. However, in reality, many behaviors involve both components. For example, birds are genetically programmed to sing, but the final song develops through learning. Thus, behavior often reflects an interaction between innate abilities and environment experiences. Accommodative learning. Animals constantly interact with their changing environment to survive successfully. They must adjust their responses based on experience. This ability to modify behavior through experiences is known as accommodative learning. So, this learning allows animals to become more efficient in responding to environment stimuli. Instead of reacting the same way every time, animals learn from their previous experiences and adjust their behavior accordingly. This type of learning increases adaptability, improves survival, and helps animal conserve energy by responding appropriately to different situations. There are two major forms of accommodative learning: habituation and sensitization. Habituation occurs when an animal gradually decreases its response to a repeated stimulus that is harmless and has no important consequences. In other words, the animal learns that the stimulus is not a threat and stops wasting energy responding to it. For example, birds may initially be frightened by a scarecrow placed in a field. However, after repeated exposure without any danger, they learn that scarecrow is harmless and eventually they start ignoring it. Now let's look at sensitization. Sensitization is the opposite of habituation. In this case, repeated exposure to a stimulus causes the animal responses to become stronger rather than weaker. This usually happens when the stimulus is associated with a danger or an important event. For example, if an animal repeatedly encounters predators, it may become increasingly alert and responsive to warning signals. Even small signs of danger may trigger strong defensive reaction and aggressive behavior. Both habituation and sensitization help animals adapt to their surroundings. Habituation prevents unnecessary responses to harmless stimuli, while sensitization increases vigilance towards potentially harmful situations. Associative learning. Another example or important form of learning in animals is associative learning. It occurs when an animals learn by forming connections or associations between events, stimuli, or behavior and their consequences. Instead of simply modifying a response, as in habituation or sensitization, animals learn that one event is linked to another. This ability allows them to predict outcomes and make better decisions for survival. So there are three major types of associative learning. The first type is classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is an example where animal learns to associate two stimuli that occur together. The famous example comes from Ivan Pavlov's experiment with dogs. Initially, food naturally causes salivation. Pavlov repeatedly rang bell before presenting food. After several repetitions, the dog began to salivate when they heard the bell alone, even when there was no food present. This demonstrated that animals can learn by associating one stimulus with another. The second type is operant conditioning. So this occurs when an animal learns through consequences of its behaviors. Behaviors followed by rewards become more likely to occur, while behaviors followed by punishments become less likely. For example, a dog may learn to sit when given a treat as a reward. Over time, the dog repeats the behavior because it has learned that sitting leads to a positive outcome. The third type is trial and error learning. In this form of learning, animals solve problems by trying different responses until they discover a successful one. Incorrect responses gradually decrease while successful responses are repeated. A classic example is a rat navigating through a maze. At first, the rat makes many mistakes, but repeated attempts, it learns that correct path to reach the food more quickly. Although these learning processes are different, they all involve forming associations based on experience. Associative learning helps animals improve their ability to find food, avoid danger, solve problems, and adapt to changing environment. Pavlov's classical conditioning. One of the most famous experiments in the history of behavioral science was conducted by Russian scientist Ivan Pavlov. His work led to discovery of classical conditioning. Pavlov originally studied digestion in dogs. During his experiments, he noticed something unusual. The dogs began salivating even before food was placed in their mouth. They seemed to anticipate food whenever they saw a laboratory assistant approaching. This observation led Pavlov to investigate how animals form associations between stimuli. Let's examine the process step by step. In the beginning, food naturally caused salivation. This is normal biological response that does not require any learning. Food is directly proportional to salivation. Pavlov then introduced a neutral stimulus, a bell. Initially, initially the bell alone produced no salivation because it has no meaning to the dog. Next, Pavlov repeatedly rang the bell just before presenting food. So it shows that bell served with food is related to salivation or leads to salivation. After many repetitions, the dog learned to associate the sound of the bell with the arrival of food. Eventually, the bell alone was enough to trigger salivation even when no food was present. Bell alone led to salivation. At this stage, learning had occurred. The bell had become a conditioned stimulus because uh, it has now produced a learned response. The salivation caused by the bell became the conditioned response. So this response can be represented as a simple flow diagram. Bell leads to conditioned stimulus leads to salivation. This experiment demonstrated that animals can learn by forming association between stimulus. Operant conditioning. Another important type of associative learning is operant conditioning, a concept developed by American psychologist B.F. Skinner. Unlike classical conditioning, where animals learn by associating two stimuli, operant conditioning involves learning through the consequences of behavior. Skinner proposed that behaviors are influenced by what happens after the behavior occurs. The basic principle can be represented as behavior leads to consequences, then consequences leads to future behaviors. If the consequence is rewarding, the behavior becomes more likely to occur again. If the consequence is unpleasant or punishing, the behavior becomes less likely to be repeated. To study this process, Skinner designed a special experiment apparatus called Skinner box. One of his famous experiments involved a rat placed inside a box containing a lever. At first, the rat moved around randomly and accidentally pressed the lever. When the lever was pressed, food was delivered. So the rat received a reward. After several repetitions, the rat learned the relationship between pressing the lever and obtaining food. As a result, the rat began pressing the lever more frequently. The learning sequence can be summarized as rat presses the lever, food gets delivered, or food is rewarded, then repeated behavior is seen or learned. This demonstrates that rewarded behaviors become stronger over time. Operant conditioning is not limited to laboratory animals, it becomes or occurs in everyday life as well. For example, a dog learns to sit when rewarded with treats. Students may study harder when they receive good grades. Even wild animals learn behaviors that lead to successful outcomes. So, Skinner's work showed that behavior is not only influenced by stimuli but also by its consequence. So this discovery became one of the most important foundations of modern learning theory, animal training, education, and behavioral psychology. Hormones and behavior. Behavior in animals is not controlled only by genes and learning. Another important factor influencing behavior is hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers produced by endocrine glands and released into bloodstream. They travel throughout the body and affect specific organs, tissues, and even the brain. By regulating body functions, hormones play a major role in controlling behavior. Let's look at some of the important behavior functions influenced by hormones. The first is growth hormone. First is growth. Growth hormones regulate body development and maturation. Proper growth is essential because physical development often affects an animal's ability to survive, compete, and also reproduce. The second function is reproduction. Hormones such as testosterone and estrogen regulate reproductive cycles, mating behavior, courtship displays, and fertility. Many animals become more active during breeding seasons because of hormonal changes. Another important function is aggression. Hormones, particularly testosterone, can influence territorial behavior and aggressive interactions. Animals often show increased aggression when defending territory, resources, or mates. The fourth function is maternal care. Hormones such as oxytocin play a crucial role in bonding between parent and offspring. These hormones promote nurturing behavior, protecting of young ones, and parental attachment. The final function is migration. Certain hormones help animals respond to seasonal changes, day length, and environmental cues. These hormonal signals prepare animals for long distance migration and seasonal movements. Hormones acts as communication system within the body, linking the brain, endocrine glands, and various organs, tissues. By influencing physiological processes, they directly affect how animals behave in different situations. For example, hormonal changes can trigger breeding behavior, increased aggression during competition, strength, parental care after birth, or prepare migratory birds for long journeys. Therefore, hormones are essential regulators of behavior and help animals respond effectively to both internal and external conditions. Genetics of behavior. Scientists have found that many behaviors have a genetic basis, meaning that genes influence how animals respond to their environment and interact with other organisms. However, behavior is rarely controlled by genes alone. Instead, it results from an interaction between genetics and environmental experiences. So, first evidence comes from selective breeding. Selective breeding involves choosing individuals with specific behavioral traits and breeding with them over many generations. For example, different dog breeds show distinct behavioral tendencies. Border collies are known for herding behavior, while retrievers naturally display retrieving behavior. Because these traits are consistently passed from parents to offspring, they provide strong evidence that behavior can be inherited. The second evidence comes from the twin studies. Scientists have observed that identical twins often show remarkable similar behavioral patterns even when raised in different environments. Since identical twins share same genetic makeup, these similarities suggest that gene plays an important role in shaping behavior, although environmental factors still influence individual differences. The third evidence comes from honeybee dance communication. Honeybee perform a highly organized waggle dance to communicate the location of the food sources to other bees in the colony. This behavior occurs without formal teaching and is remarkably similar across honeybee population because the dance is performed instinctively and consistently. Scientists consider it a strong example of genetically programmed behavior. Despite this evidence, behavior cannot be explained by genes alone. Environmental influences such as learning, social interactions, experience, and habitat conditions also shape the behavior. This relationship is summarized by an important formula: genes plus environment equals behavior. Neural control of behavior. Every behavior from simple reflex to complex decision making depends on the nervous system receiving information, processing it, and producing an appropriate response. The nervous system is divided into two major components, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Let's begin with the central nervous system, or also known as CNS. The CNS consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is the primary control center of the body. It receives information from sensory organs, processes the information, stores memories, and coordinates behavior. The spinal cord serves as communication pathway between the brain and the rest of the body. It also controls certain rapid responses known as reflex action. Together, the brain and spinal cord analyze incoming information and generate appropriate behavioral response. The second major component is the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. The PNS includes all nerves that connect the CNS to various body organs, muscles, and sensory receptors. It acts as communication network, carrying information from the environment to the CNS and transmitting instructions from the CNS back to different parts of the body. For example, when an animal sees a predator, sensory nerves carry visual information to the brain. The brain processes the threat and sends signal through motor nerves to muscles, allowing the animal to run away. Without the PNS, the brain and the spinal cord would not be able to communicate with the rest of the body. Therefore, both systems work together continuously to control behavior. Neuron structure. A neuron, also called as a nerve cell, is the structural and functional unit of a nervous system. Neurons receive information, process signals, and transmit messages throughout the body. Every behavior, thought, movement, and response depends on communication between these neurons. A neuron consists of three main parts. The first part is dendrites. Dendrites are branch-like extensions that receive incoming signals from other neurons or sensory receptors. They act like antennas, collecting information from the surrounding environment and transmitting it towards the cell body. The second part is the cell body, also called as soma. The cell body contains nucleus and other important cellular structures. It processes incoming information and determines whether the signal should be passed on to the neurons or not. The third part is axon. The axon is long specialized fiber that carries nerve impulses away from the cell body towards the other neurons, muscles, or glands. Some axons can be extremely long, allowing communication between distant parts of the body. The flow of information through a neuron can be represented as dendrites towards cell body, then towards to axon. However, neurons do not communicate directly with one another. Instead, they use chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are released at junctions called synapses and carry signals from one neuron to the next. Let's look at three important neurotransmitters. The first is dopamine. Dopamine is associated with reward, motivation, pleasure, and movement. It plays an important role in learning and reinforcement of behavior. Second is serotonin, which helps regulate mood, emotions, sleep patterns, and overall well-being. Balanced serotonin levels contributes to normal behavioral functioning. The third is acetylcholine, which is involved in muscle contraction, learning, memory formation, and communication between nerve cells. Together, neurons and neurotransmitters form an intricate communication network that enables animals to sense their environment, process information, and generate appropriate behavioral response. Behavioral control pathway. Every behavior begins with a stimulus. A stimulus is any change in the internal or external environment that can be detected by an organism. Examples including light, sound, temperature, touch, or the presence of food or predators. The first step in the behavioral control pathway is the receptors. Receptors are specialized sensory cells that detect the stimulus. They convert environmental information into nerve impulses that can be transmitted through the nervous system. Once the stimulus is detected, the signal travels through a sensory neuron. The sensory neuron carry information from receptors to the central nervous system. The CNS, which includes the brain and spinal cord, acts as the control center. It receives the information, processes it, and decides what response should occur. After processing, the CNS sends the instructions through motor nerves or motor neurons. Motor neurons carry signals away from the CNS towards muscles or glands. These muscles or glands are known as effectors because they carry out the response. Finally, the effector produces the response, which is the observable action performed by the organism. The complete pathway can be summarized as stimulus leads to receptor, receptor leads to sensory neuron leads to CNS, CNS leads to motor neuron, then it leads to effector, then comes the response. Imagine you accidentally touch a hot object. The heat acts as stimulus. Receptor in your skin detects the high temperature. Sensory neurons carry the signals to the spinal cord and brain. The CNS rapidly processes this information and sends commands through motor neurons. The muscles of your arm, acting as effectors, contract immediately. As a result, you quickly withdraw your hand from the hot object. This rapid response protects the body from injury and demonstrates how efficiently the nervous system coordinates behavior. Stereotyped behavior. A stereotyped behavior is a fixed pattern of action that is performed in a similar way whenever it is triggered. These behaviors are usually innate, meaning they are genetically programmed rather than learned. Because they are inherited, individuals of the same species often perform these behaviors almost identically. Let's look at the major characteristics of stereotype behaviors. The first character is that it is fixed. Once initiated, the behavior tends to follow a specific sequence of actions with little variations. The second characteristic is predictable. The behavior occurs in consistent manner each time it is performed. The third characteristic is that it is repetitive. The same behavioral pattern may be repeated many times whenever the appropriate stimulus is present. And the fourth characteristic is species specific. Different species possess their own unique stereotyped behavior that distinguish them from other animals. Let's examine some common example. One example is nest building. Many birds species construct nests using highly organized and repeated behavioral patterns. Even birds raised without observing adults often build specific nests. Another example is courtship display. Animals perform characteristic movement, sounds, colors, or dance to attract mates. These displays are often highly structured and repeated in exactly the same way. The third example is web spinning in spiders. Spiders create intricate webs using a fixed sequence of movements. Even without training, young spiders are capable of building webs that closely resemble those of adult spiders. So these examples demonstrate the stereotyped behaviors, which are controlled largely by genetic programming and have evolved because they improve survival and reproductive success. Kinesis and taxis. Although both are reactions to environment stimuli, they differ in an important way. Let's begin with kinesis. Kinesis is a non-directional movement response to a stimulus. In kinesis, what happens is the animal does not move towards or away from the stimulus. Instead, the intensity of the stimulus affects the animal's speed of movement or rate of turning. Because the direction is random, kinesis helps animals eventually reach more favorable conditions without directly orienting themselves towards a specific stimulus. There are two types of kinesis: orthokinesis and clinokinesis. In orthokinesis, the speed of movement changes according to the intensity of the stimulus. For example, wood lice moves faster in dry conditions and slower in moist conditions. By moving quickly through unfavorable environments and slowing down in favorable ones, they increase the chances of remaining in stable habitats or suitable habitats. The second is clinokinesis. In this type, what happens is the rate of turning changes according to the intensity of the stimulus. For example, flatworms increase their turning moments in unfavorable environments, causing them to remain longer in areas where conditions improve. Now let's look at taxis. Taxis is directional movement response. An animal moves either towards a stimuli or away from it. Movement towards a stimulus is called as positive taxis, while movement away from a stimulus is called as negative taxis. So there are several types of taxis based on the stimulus involved. First one is phototaxis. It is a movement in response of light. Many insects show positive phototaxis by moving towards the light source. Second one is chemotaxis, which is the movement in response to chemicals. Bacteria often move towards nutrients through positive chemotaxis. Then comes geotaxis. It is a movement in response to gravity. Some insects climb upwards against gravity while some move downwards. The key difference between kinesis and taxis is direction. In kinesis, what happens is movement is random and depends on stimulus intensity. In taxis, movement is directed towards or away from the stimulus source. Both responses help animals locate suitable environments and improve their chances of survival. Orientation. Animals often need to travel long distance, locate food, return to their homes, or migrate across continents. To accomplish these tasks successfully, they must be able to determine their position and direction in the environment. And this ability is known as orientation. Orientation refers to the process by which animals use environmental cues to navigate and maintain desired direction of movement. Different species have evolved different methods of orientation depending on their habitat and lifestyle. There are three major types of orientation. The first is piloting. Piloting involves the use of familiar landmarks to navigate. Animals recognize visual features in their surroundings and use them as reference points to reach a specific destination. A common example is homing pigeon. Pigeon can identify landmarks such as buildings, roads, rivers, and trees to find their way back to their home loft. Piloting works best in familiar environments where recognizable landmarks are available. The second type is compass orientation. In this type, animal uses natural directional cues such as the sun, stars, polarized light, or Earth's magnetic field. Unlike piloting, animals do not need familiar landmarks. Instead, they maintain a constant direction using these natural compasses. Migratory birds are excellent examples. During long distance migrations, they use the position of the sun during the day and stars at night to navigate across thousands of kilometers. Some species can even detect Earth's magnetic field and use it as an internal compass. The third type is dead reckoning. Dead reckoning involves calculating the distance and directions traveled from a starting point. Animals continuously track their movements and estimate how far and in what direction they have moved. Desert ants provide one of the best examples of orientation methods. While searching for food, desert ants travel along winding paths. However, when returning to their nest, they can calculate the shortest direct route by keeping track of distance and directions traveled. This remarkable ability allows them to navigate successfully even in environments with fewer landmarks. Although these methods differ, they all help animals locate resources, avoid danger, migrate successfully, and return to their important locations. Reflexes. Not all behavioral responses require conscious thought or decision making. Some responses occur almost instantly to protect the body from harm. These rapid and automatic responses are known as reflexes. A reflex is involuntary response to a stimulus that occurs without conscious control. Reflexes are extremely important because they help organisms react quickly to potential dangerous situations. Reflexes have three major characteristics. The first one is rapid. Reflex action can occur within a fraction of a second. The nervous system processes this information very quickly so that the body can respond immediately. The second one is automatic. Reflexes occur without conscious thinking. You do not decide to perform a reflex. It happens automatically when the appropriate stimulus is detected. The third characteristic is that they are protective. Most reflexes help prevent injury and increase survival by allowing the body to respond quickly to harmful situations. For example, blinking. When an object suddenly approaches the eye or bright light enters the eyelids closes automatically. This reflex protects the delicate tissues of eyes from getting damaged. The second example is knee jerk reflex. When a doctor taps the tendon below the kneecap, the lower leg automatically kicks forward. This reflex helps maintain posture and balance. The third example is hand withdrawal. Imagine touching a hot object. Before you consciously realize the danger, your hand is rapidly pulled away. This reflex protects the body from burns and tissue damage. So we have covered a major area of animal behavior. Before moving on, let's quickly revise the most important concepts covered throughout this video. Let's remember the founders of ethology, the scientists who established the scientific study of animal behavior in natural conditions. These pioneers were Konrad Lorenz, known for his work on imprinting and instinctive behavior; Niko Tinbergen, who studied behavioral mechanisms and developed methods for analyzing animal behavior; Karl von Frisch, who discovered the famous honeybee waggle dance and demonstrated how bees communicate information about the food sources. Together, these scientists laid the foundation of modern ethology and were awarded Nobel Prize in 1973. Next, let's revise major types of learning. The first is habituation, second is sensitization, third is classical conditioning, fourth is operant conditioning, fifth is trial and error learning. Now let's revise hormones influencing behavior. Testosterone influences aggression and territorial behaviors. Estrogen regulates female reproductive behavior. Oxytocin promotes bonding and maternal care. Cortisol controls stress response. Melatonin regulates circadian rhythms and biological clocks. Finally, let's review the major categories of stereotyped behavior. Kinesis, which involves random movement influenced by stimulus intensity. Taxis involves directional movement towards or away from a stimulus. Orientation helps animals determine their position and direction using environmental cues. Reflexes are rapid, automatic, and protective response to stimuli. Together, these concepts help us understand how animals survive, adapt, communicate, reproduce, and interact with their environment. If you remember these key points, you will have a strong foundation for understanding animal behavior and performing well in examinations. So, thank you. That's all for today.